Namaskar. Guru Purnima is just a few days away. The best way we can honor our gurus is by living the values they left us. To help you with this, we are offering 50% off on books, Bhagavad Gita commentaries, online courses, and inspirational talks. Get wisdom worth 9,000 rupees for just 4,500. Visit vedantavision.org to place your order. Jayaji's special Guru Purnima talks on happiness will take place in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, and Bangalore. If you haven't registered yet, please register now. The links are in the description box. There will be no webinar on next Saturday, 25th July, as Jayaji will be speaking live in Mumbai for Guru Purnima. If you are in Mumbai, we warmly invite you to join us in person. Invite your family and friends in Mumbai to this illuminating talk. And now, I invite Jayaji to continue with Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 8.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Any questions?
If we are equanimous, is there any separate or different kind of feeling than happiness or sadness? Or it is if we are equanimous?
Okay, so the question is, if you're equanimous, because that is what we are talking about, being at peace, is it the same as being happy or excited about some achievement? No. The big difference is that when you are equanimous by yourself, and it is independent of anything outside you. So someone may be nice to you, someone may not be nice to you, there may be a birth, there may be a death, there may be profit, there may be loss. Whatever happens in the world, your equanimity is not disturbed. So that's very different from buying a new car and being excited about it. Because that's very temporary. It goes. Right?
That brings me to the answer of the second chapter, the answer that Krishna gives to Sthitaprajna portion. Dukeshwaro Vindamana Sukeshwaro Vigatasu. It means that the person does experience that sadness and happiness, or he does not experience it at all.
See, he is referring to a verse from chapter 2, the Sthita Prajna portion, where he describes a person who has reached realization. And he says he doesn't sink with sorrow and doesn't jump with joy. Okay? So his question is, does it mean that he doesn't feel anything? Or that he feels? If he doesn't feel anything, he is not human. He is a stone. Even animals feel. But he is not affected by it. And there is a world of difference between the two. Right? Animals feel very deeply, but they are affected. So you find, like birds, if a pair of birds, if one dies, the other dies. They can't exist without the partner. Among human beings, it's not like that. We feel very deep emotions. We have the capacity to not get affected. How are you not get affected? Because of knowledge. Because of that, your experience of infinity Okay, that is a man of realization. But I'm talking about us at our level. How are you not affected? You have to go back to your own experiences. When do you not get affected? Like, say, you are traveling in a taxi and you leave a pen behind. Are you going to be sorrow stricken? You just write it off and move on. Get yourself another pen. But if it's an expensive pen given to you by someone and you have an emotional, connection with it, then you feel it for a while, but that also you move on. So what? So what? At some stage, you are not able to take it. You collapse completely. Now, that is your spiritual level. So, up to that, you feel you're not affected. Beyond that, you get affected. So now the problem is we are at 30-40% at best. So most things affect us. And now the younger generation is even worse. One like, one dislike, one this, one that affects you. Right? So what she's talking about, equanimity, is a state where you are not affected because you are experiencing complete total abundance. See, you have to take examples. When you play a game with a child, does it matter to you whether you win or lose? Why? Because your happiness rests on something much higher, much more fulfilling, much more satisfying. Correct? Now, at this your level, why are you getting affected? Because you haven't moved to anything higher. Okay? So that is the thing. Now friends, towards the end of the last class, we took verses 12, 13 and 14, which are very important. Now some of you may not have been there last time, and even those of you who were there, I guarantee you if I ask you what is 12, 13, 14, you won't know. Now because it is very important, I think we should take it again. Okay? So we'll take verses 12 and 13 together.
सर्वद्वाराणि संयम्य मनोहृदि निरुध्य च मूर्ध्याधायात्मनः प्राणम् आस्थितो योगधारणाम् ओमित्येकाक्षरं ब्रह्म व्याहरन् मामनुस्मरन् यः प्रयाति त्यजन् देहं स याति परमां गतिम्.
Having controlled all the gates, confining the mind in the heart, fixing one's prana, life energy, in the head, established in the yoga of concentration. 13. Reciting the one-syllabled Om Brahman, one who departs remembering me obtains the supreme goal on leaving the body. Now what we're going to do is to understand the verses as they are, because he's talking about the highest level of meditation. Just prior to realization, actually he talks about realization, obtains the supreme goal. What is more important is we need to bring it down to our level and say, what are these verses saying to us? How can we apply it in our lives? That's more important, right? So let's take it as it is. Controlling all the gates means sense control. If the gates are too open, then you are indulging. So this is what some people do, party till 4 a.m. every day, have late night dinners, eat whatever you want, all of that, drink however much you want. This is indulgence. When you live a life like this, you cannot achieve anything. So there has to be an element of sense control. But if the gates are too shut, all shut, there is frustration because you have desires and you can't do anything. Unless you have a higher goal. Like, suppose I were to tell you, eat boiled food every day. Just boiled food. Other than salt, you're not getting anything else. No masala, no pav bhaji, no, none of that. How long will you be able to do it? You can't do it. But when you have a goal, like Virat Kohli has a goal of what? Excelling in cricket. Huh? Or all these football players who are now playing. Whether it is sport or music or even art, there has to be an element of sense control. And the greater the focus, the greater the self-control needed. So then you don't get frustrated, right? So there has to be a balance between what you want to do, which is your greater desire, and the lower desire, which is indulgence. So that is why most people say, have a cheat day. What is a cheat day? One day where you indulge. And then when you get used to it, you don't even feel like having that cheat day because you're quite happy within the parameters of what your discipline allows. So that is that. And this cannot be fixed for all because it is highly individual. What is indulgence for you may be frustration for another person. You know? So it has to be individually thought about and prescribed. And then you have to see how you feel about it. If you feel frustrated, let loose a little bit. You know? If you're okay with it, you can control a little more. It's like that. And here, when the goal is to get to realization, you don't allow anything to come in the way of your pursuit. This is true of any goal. But if a particular enjoyment does not interfere with your pursuit, by all means go and enjoy it. Correct? Now, after we finished here, suppose you're going out for dinner. And at the end of the dinner, someone offers you a dessert, ice cream, let's say, or mango, or something. Your intellect has to come in place and ask, do I have it? Do I not have it? So, let's say your intellect says that you have been extremely disciplined, you haven't eaten out for the last 1 month, you are not overweight, you're not diabetic, you have no high cholesterol, etc. You're completely, totally fit. And this is something that you really like. Intellect says, go ahead and have it. You are still under self-control. You get it? But if you are overweight, you're highly diabetic, you have high cholesterol, high triglycerides, you are in a bad shape, and you have been indulging for the past 15 days, you've gone on a vacation and you've let loose. Then what does your intellect say? Don't have it. Then you follow that, you are still under self-control. So self-control is not self-denial, it's not unintelligent self-denial. It is intelligent enjoyment of the senses. It is, remember this, intelligent enjoyment of the senses. Then,
The problem is most of the time the mind really takes over and you tend to, give in to the desire. How does one then really, work that out?
because your intellect is not strong enough and your desire is too strong. Right? So, what we have done as a society is given too much importance to sense indulgence. Particularly, like we are all foodies. Wherever you go, first thing people talk about is food. If food is good, you're fine. Now that must change, right? Your thinking must be that I don't live to eat. I eat to live. There's a basic difference. And then everything else falls in place. So your mind must shift to something higher. So there are two things here. Intellect is not strong enough, so you need to develop the intellect. Number two, mind must itself be taken to something higher. Then you are able to control. Okay? You see, for everything you have to pay a price. If you're not willing to pay the price, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen by somebody putting their hand on your head. Okay, second, confine the mind in the heart. Means there must be that inward gaze. You must understand that everything lies within me. And it's about emotions, you develop fine, subtle, noble emotions. Today, we are at the surface. So, the whole country is ruled by Bollywood, which is about surface emotions. Where is the depth of love? Anywhere. Or consideration, affection, everything, there has to be a depth to it, right? Like we saw last time, Sidney Carton. I mean, that example, Charles Dickens in The Tale of Two Cities writes about this man, Sidney Carton, who, according to social standards, is a complete failure. He's a lawyer, but he drinks too much, so he's dismissed by society. But what a man. And he falls in love with this girl. And because a French aristocrat also falls in love with him, he understands she will be happier with him than with me. Who am I? I have nothing to offer. So he withdraws and allows that romance to flourish, and they get married. But he maintains this love for her right through, from a distance, mind you. He does not interfere with her life. But when the time comes, he steps in, which is her husband, the French aristocrat, is taken, thrown into a dungeon, and he's going to be, what is it called? Guillotined. He's going to be guillotined the next day. And here comes Sidney Carton. He covers himself up. He pretends to be coughing and having a cold. He tells the guard, I want to meet this prisoner, I'm his lawyer. Because even in those days, the only person who was allowed to meet the prisoner was the lawyer. So he's taken some smelling salt, something to make him faint. And he quickly changes clothes, exchanges his clothes with him. And calls out to the guard and says, Guard, my lawyer has fainted. Take him away. You know what he's done? He's changed places with a man who's going to be guillotined the next day. The only person who sees what's happened is a 16-year-old girl in the opposite cell who's scared to die. Poor thing. She looks at this and is inspired. And the next day, when they're being carted to the guillotine, she looks up at him and says, Will you please hold my hand? I'm scared. And he holds her hand and gives her courage. And Charles Dickens says, what must be going on in his mind as he's being carted? It's a far, far better thing than I've ever done. It's a far, far better world I go to than I've ever known. What a man. I mean, it may be fiction, but Charles Dickens must have that purity and that nobility of emotion to even present a story like this. Right? Now we are so gross, we can't even relate to it. Like somebody came to me and said, does it mean I have to give my life? I said, you haven't understood. It's not about giving your life. It's about cultivating this purity of love. This is called love. Huh? Not running around trees. So this is, now why is he saying it when he's talking about meditation? Because we must cultivate purity of heart. This ability to reach out to people instead of sitting and criticizing. This leads to peace of mind, equanimity. You know, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest hedge funds of the world, his name is Ray Dalio, I think. Never mind the name. He says the one thing that has given him the competitive edge in business, okay, is peace of mind, equanimity. How do you get this equanimity? You don't get it by sitting in meditation. You get it by cultivating this purity of heart. Pure love. We don't even understand what pure love is. Forget pure. We don't understand what love is. It's not about buying expensive gifts for people, please. It's not about going to a fancy restaurant. It's about your heart reaching out to people. Feeling one with the other person. And for that, you're willing to do anything. So, this is confining the mind in the heart. And then intellectual, fix the prana in the head. Think of your goal all the time. In this case, think of Atman constantly, consistently, persistently. Trace all your experiences to Atman. Open your eyes, you see, you should be ecstatic. Not because of what you're seeing, because Atman enables me to see. Don't go around telling people that. After class, you go home and you say, I am ecstatic because Atman enables me to see. Your family members will straight take you to a psychiatrist. Just within yourself. You hear, whether it's pleasant sound or unpleasant sound, it's that divine force that enables me to hear. So this is with reference to meditation. And then you're in yogic concentration, meditation, which is the definition of meditation, is when the mind is focused on one thought to the exclusion of all other thoughts, under the supervision of the intellect. This is a definition, which means every word is important. If it is not under the supervision of the intellect means you are aware, 100% aware, and your mind is in the present. Now you try meditating. By the time you're chanting Om, right? Third Om, you're thinking of home. I think I left the AC on. I don't know. Random thoughts come to your mind. And by the time you realize, you've gone off somewhere else. You don't even know how you can't even trace how you've reached there. So you bring back the mind. Another 3 Oms, off it goes somewhere else. Where does it go? Why does it go? Where does it go? Correct. Objects of desire, wherever you have desire. So how to focus? Reduce your desires. Therefore, meditation is not something that everyone can do. It's the highest level, where you've gone through the karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga. You've reached that uparati, and then you've gone through the concentration, dharana. Now you're at the mountain peak, dhyana, meditation. So then he says now, reciting Om. He is giving Om as the mantra, but you can pick any mantra. Like Sant Tukaram had Vithala. You know the bhajan you listened to just now? It's about that. It's so inspiring. He says, if the eye sees, must only see your roop. If the ears hear, must only hear your glory. Wherever the mind goes, must stop at your feet, not go beyond that. And he prays, he says, that's all my prayer is. That I should be able to recite Vithoba all the time. So it could be any mantra. But he's selected Om because it is a universal mantra. It is not restricted to any particular country, race, religion, nothing. How do we know that? It's not even a Sanskrit word. Because it is not subject to the declensions that all other Sanskrit words are subject to. Have you ever heard Om? Never. Om is Om, pure. It has an intonational effect and intellectual. Intonational is just the recitation of Om has a calming effect on you. That's why it is played to horses, race horses, before they go and run. Do you know that? It is played when in OTs, operation theatres, to calm not just the doctor and the nurses and all the team, but also the patient. So it has an effect. I met one guy who plays Om to plants. That is a bit too much, but anyway. And the intellectual thing is, Om consists of 3 alphabets, A, U and Ma. They represent the waking, dream and deep sleep states. Just as silence is the substratum of all sound. You can't hear unless there is silence, right? The background has to be silence. Similarly, spirit, Atman, is the substratum of all your experiences in waking, dream or deep sleep states. Now look where we are. We either experience the waking or dream or deep sleep. Never all 3. Right? And when you're in any one, you believe that to be true, you discard the reality of the other 2. So, your experience is very small. And spirit, Atman, is everything. Your nature is that. Your nature is everything. You've confined yourself. Got to get there. Then he says, one who departs remembering me. One who departs means not leave the room and go. Departs means what? Reach this state of realization. How do you get there? Remembering me. So simple. Why simple? Because the law is as you think, so you become. All these years, janmas, you've been thinking of body, 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 you've become the body. Then the slightest thing happens to the body, oh, I can't come. It's like in Sound of Music. Have you seen that movie, Sound of Music? The littlest girl, he has 7 children, this littlest. This prospective stepmother comes and the children are so badly affected, they don't want her. So when she asks her to sing, this little girl, she says, I can't sing. Why? My thumbs hurt. So we are like that. We can't function because some little thing goes wrong. You've got to tell yourself. Like if somebody asks you, how are you? I'm fine. But my back is hurting or whatever. I've got a headache. Can you not separate yourself from the body? Why can't you? Practice it. You have 104 temperature. I hope not, but I'm just saying. Somebody comes and says, how are you? I'm fine. I just have fever. Then there is that separation. Then you're able to be happy in spite of the fever. Mind hasn't got fever, right? Mind's fever is something else. What is mind's fever? Huh? Desires. So it's like that. Remembering me is resultant thought. When you continuously think of only one thought, there's that final precipitation that happens. Like in a chemistry lab, you take a solution of copper sulfate and keep saturating it. Keep on saturating it, goes on and on and on, and you almost go to sleep. And then suddenly, brilliant crystals appear. How many of you have actually seen this, have done this chemistry experiment on copper sulfate? Oh, not bad. I wish I could show you one. It's so beautiful. The copper sulfate crystals are the most beautiful. And when you're doing it in the lab and you're almost falling asleep, then suddenly the crystals appear. Oh my God, it's like God realization. It's like that. So you keep thinking. Don't get fed up. Don't get impatient. Keep on at it. Keep at it. I just heard a video this afternoon about this basketball player. What's his name? Basketball. Kobe Bryant, who died, yeah. Okay? So somebody was interviewing him and he said the guy wanted to be better than him. So he decided to go for practice early, according to him. 7:30 he went. He found Kobe Bryant there. He had come there at 4 in the morning. Practicing. Anytime he went, this guy was practicing. Then he realized, my God, this is why this guy is so great. You see, anybody, if you want to succeed in any field, you've got to just have this. Keep thinking. Whatever you think, you become. You think trash, you will become trash. That is what we are all thinking. What is that trash? Huh? What is the trash we're thinking? Object. Which object are we all thinking of? Huh? Money, correct. That is the trash you're thinking of. You know why I'm calling it trash? Do you see the absurdity of the situation? We are all running after money. Huh? And I can guarantee you, you don't have to be a billionaire. Whatever assets you have as of now, in your entire lifetime, you are not going to consume it. Guaranteed. What are you doing with it? Investing, correct? Huh? Investing and grabbing more. And when it comes to giving, you don't want to give. You are so cheap. I don't mean you, don't take it literally. People are so cheap. The richest of people give donation of 1,000 rupees, 500 rupees. I feel like saying, you keep it, yeah. Even a beggar will throw it back in your face, whatever you're giving. Keep it, don't give. If you give, you must give wholeheartedly. Otherwise, don't give. Nobody is so poor as to need your money. Get it? You are going to suffer. You know why? Because for that money, you're giving up relationships, you're fighting with people, you're taking them to court, you're spending years paying lawyers. You would rather pay a lawyer to fight your case than to actually give. All this you'll do. and suffer. And after all this, you're not going to use the money. Have you heard of a situation as absurd as that? So what must we do? Start giving, man. Because only when you give, you experience abundance. And this experiencing abundance has nothing to do with your assets. Sudama, who was an absolute pauper, felt totally abundant. Forget those times. Even now, I know so many people, a carpenter here, a servant there, they give. One person who works for us, his brother was an alcoholic. He was dying anyway. But he took him to a hospital some place for a liver transplant. And he gave his money. He took a loan of 6 months of his income. You won't even give a 1 day's income to anybody, not even your brother. So I'm asking you, who's rich? Not you. Because you don't give. And why don't you not give? Because you don't experience abundance. You experience poverty. You may be living in fancy homes. You may be running around in fancy cars. But within yourself, you are a pauper. Why? Because you're thinking small. Small thinking. Petty-mindedness. How can you? You know, in America, 60% of the total money that is donated comes from middle-class Americans. When I heard that, I was shocked. You know what that means? You and me. You're middle class. You're not a billionaire, right? We are the guys who give 60% of donations. Come to India, nobody gives. Because the middle class think, oh, the rich guy will give. Rich guys never give. So what's happening? Nobody is giving. You're only looking at how much more can I get? One more luxury car. One more, what is that? Designer something or the other. One more fancy, one better apartment. That's all you're looking at. I am today, this remember me, remember spirit, which is completely abundant. Unless you think that you are not going to get to realization, you can forget about spiritual development. Right? And don't get me wrong, please. I am not saying give to my associations. You can give wherever you want. Don't give, don't give. It's your life. But if you want to grow, you must give. And a percentage of your income. Just as you pay taxes. I can't say that because you don't even pay tax. Those who leave the body remembering me, depart remembering me, obtain the supreme goal. So you know what it is? You must rise to higher and higher levels of thinking. Your vision must expand. Only then you'll reach to spirit, Atman, which is infinite. If you want to get to infinite and you're clutching at straws, how will you get there? Leave the body means transcend the body, mind, intellect, vasanas, everything. It's like a snake which just leaves its skin behind and moves on. Have you seen that? At least in a film, video. It's amazing how that snake does it. It just leaves the skin behind. That way, you take on, you are the spirit, you just The body, mind, intellect were useful to you until you got to that stage. Now you don't no longer need them, discard them. You reach that state of infinity. And then verse 14. Sorry, just stop it. Now come to, remember we said we'll look at the realization, meditation, that's what exactly the verse is talking about, and then come down to us, our level. Sense control is necessary, whatever you want to achieve. Okay? So you have to give yourself, like you said, intellect is not strong enough to control. So you give yourself barriers. Like you say, weekdays, I will not have late nights. Then it's easy. It's a parameter within which you exist. Or you say, I will not drink on weekdays. That's easy. But you can't say, I will go to a bar, I will go to a party and not drink. That's not possible. If you have a weakness for it. So you give yourself parameters. Like, again, I heard Akshay Kumar talking about, he's into fitness. He's one of the most fit actors. So he said, after 6:30, don't eat. Don't even think of eating. 6:30 p.m., that's it. Why? And this is according to Ayurveda also. Ayurveda says your digestive system follows sattva, rajas, tamas. So the digestive system is at its best in the early hours of the day. Middle hours, okay. And after sunset, tamas. It needs rest. Now you are loading it with food at what? 10 p.m., 11 p.m. How will you? You can't sustain. Discipline. So suppose you say after 6:30 I don't eat. Finished. People will stop inviting you. Because you will go there and drink water. And then you say, I need my sleep during weekdays. That's it. In America, except for New York and maybe Chicago, I don't know. Rest of the country, by 9 p.m., everything is shut. If you don't believe me, go see. Even in big cities like Houston, because I used to go for lectures, the lecture gets over at 9, and people used to say, come for dinner. Where dinner? Everything is shut. All restaurants are shut. Weekdays. Then Friday night, of course, they party. So that discipline you must have. Then inward gaze. Anything that goes wrong in life, you must look within. Like, let's say you have an altercation with someone. Look within and say, could I have handled it better? Could I have avoided this altercation? Could I have understood the person better? In your mind. You don't have to say anything. Automatically you feel better. Try it. When things go right also, you look within and say, do I really need it? Is this object giving me happiness? Reflect. And then intellectually, you have to fix a goal for yourself and constantly think of that goal. You must pour your energies into that goal. Then you achieve it. It could be anything. It could be music, it could be art, it could be business, it could be an NGO that you're working for, it could be anything. Like this afternoon, I heard of a lady, one of my classmates, who goes into villages, selects villages in and around Maharashtra, and takes the women, teaches them skills to do things, and takes those products, sells them, and gives the money back to them. So it's giving them a sense of confidence that they're not dependent on their husbands to that extent. And it's a completely different story. Now she's done it. I'm not asking you to do it, but that's her goal. And she's achieved fantastic results with it. So she never they socialize and they party and all that. She's not free to go because she's busy. So this is what we mean by fix prana in the head. You must fix a goal, an unselfish goal, beyond your selfish interests. And then think continuously of it. And remember all the time. You go to bed, you must remember your ideal. And then, as you think again, you get creative. You think of solutions. You think of things that you can do. Like there was a doctor many years ago who was sent to, in those days, I don't know what the thing is now, but there was a 6-month internship or 2 years internship which they had to do before they got their MBBS degree. And that internship had to be in a rural area. So he happened to be sent to a tribal area very close to Mumbai. He got a shock when he saw them. He said, they had no medical care whatsoever, zero, not even a compounder. And he saw the purity of those people and how simple they were. And he made it his mission to, during his internship, to give them the best possible treatment. And he used to come to Mumbai and take specialists there, eye doctors and whatever, so that they got good treatment. And when he left, they gave him such a warm farewell because he had done so much for them. So that's what it is. Then you reach happiness. Then you don't have to have fancy, what is that, designer clothes or bags. You don't have to have fancy cars. But you reach that state of happiness which is equanimity. It doesn't get disturbed easily. Okay? 12, 13. Yeah.
This is related to thinking. So like a body naturally grows. We don't have to really put in the effort. To what extent does a mind or like a thinking evolve, or is it all effort that we have to put in there?
A question is, the body grows naturally. You're born, you don't have to put in effort to, actually you have. Have you seen a child, baby, puts in tremendous effort to sit up, to walk, to crawl. Everything is an effort. But anyway, I understand your thing. The body grows by itself to adulthood. Up to that, it grows vertically. After that, horizontally. But mind and intellect have to be developed consciously. You can't escape that. Naturally, the mind does not evolve. Naturally, the intellect does not. You have been gifted with the mind and intellect. It's up to you what you want to do with it. So you can cultivate negative emotions and then you become criminal, terrorist, all that. Or you can develop fine emotions and become like a Sydney Carton. Similarly, intellect. You can be confused and make terrible mistakes in life, or you can develop an absolute clarity. That's what we're talking about. See, if the mind and intellect naturally develop, then why are you coming here for Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita would be irrelevant, redundant. Okay? 14.
अनन्यचेता सततम् यो मां स्मरति नित्यशः तस्याहं सुलभः पार्थ नित्ययुक्तस्य योगिनः.
See how he quickly changes track. It's psychology, because 12 and 13 seem so difficult. So now when you think something is very difficult, You won't even try. You think it's unattainable. So immediately comes down to our level and says, Upartha, I'm easily attainable. Sulabha. Sulabha means very easy. By that ever steadfast yogi who always remembers me constantly with no other thought. So he's actually cheating us. One minute he says easily, and then he says, you have to think. Ananya cheta, no other thought. Satatam, constantly. Nityashaha, consistently. Same, synonyms. 3 words he uses. Whatever it is that you want to achieve, you must think of it like this. These 3 words. Ananya cheta, no other thought. Nityashaha, satatam. So you see, prayer is not some mechanical ritual. It's not some words that you pick up and mumble. It is not some mindless repetition of something that you don't understand. It is where you offer your entire being, all your perceptions, emotions, thoughts to the altar of that goal. Then magic happens. That is called remembering. It's not an idle remembering. The moment you think of anything other than Atman, you have sold yourself short. You've shortchanged yourself. And problems happen in life. So if you're facing problems, it's not because the problem is there. It's because your thinking is all wrong. You're dependent. Right? You see, in a school, there's a child, which child gets bullied? A weak child. Huh? I know a child that has been bullied right through from the 1st standard to the 10th standard. Horrible. From the school bus onwards. Why? Because he's weak. All you have to do is turn around and face the monster. That's it. You know, when Swami Vivekananda was going on Banaras, Kashi, walking along the street, monkeys started chasing him. So he was running away from the monkeys. When a sadhu sitting by the roadside said, face the brutes. He just turned around, looked at the monkeys, they ran for their lives. So this is what problems are in life. They are like monkeys who are chasing you. How can you run away from them? Just turn around. It's your mind. See, the biggest devil is your own mind. Call the bluff of your mind. Because it's the mind that is tormenting you. Right? In the end, face up to it. See, when you fix a goal and you say, I will work for it, come what may. Whatever happens, I will seek it. Whatever. Then you achieve it. Sulabha, easily. That's all you have to do, focus. Right? Next verse.
मामुपेत्य पुनर्जन्म दुःखालयमशाश्वतम् नाप्नुवन्ति महात्मानः संसिद्धिं परमां गताः.
Having attained me, the Mahatmas, great souls, are not born again to the abode of pain. Dukkhalaya. You know what it means? Dukkhalaya means the home of pain. See, this world and your life here is nothing but pain. You go from one pain to the other. And ashashvatam, temporary, transient. For that you're giving an arm and a leg. For that you're sacrificing the most valuable thing in you. Does that make sense? They have gone to the highest perfection. So, with this verse, we enter the second last topic of this chapter, rebirth and beyond. It's the most fascinating portion. We are not going to complete it this time, but I recommend that you come next Wednesday for sure. It's really a fascinating thing. So, ordinary mortals are subject to rebirth. Why? What is the fuel that causes rebirth? Desire. Correct. Who answered that? Excellent. Desire. And it's not just rebirth. The death itself is scheduled by you, is programmed by you. The only thing is you don't know it. You'll say, how is it? Because you think thoughts at random. Random thoughts. You don't know what you're thinking from the time you woke up till now. Do you know how many thoughts you've thought of? No. But they have an impact. So, the resultant of all of that is what is making you move from experience to experience during your lifetime and after death. Mahatmas, the difference is they have no desire, so there is no movement. So, rishis, in the past, the Indian thought was that they did not worry about death. They were not afraid of death. Rebirth was the problem. You know? See, for instance, you have thought, my school admission is over, we're crying, my first day at school, all of that is over, doing a 10th standard exam, 12th standard exam, all this is over, and then the rest, though, you know what you've gone through. You think it's over. No. Because rebirth means again you're going to go through the same rituals, the same pain, the same sorrow, the same. That is the problem, my friends. Rebirth. And what are you doing about it? You're smug. You're smug in the belief, I have so many millions in my coffers. Some declared, most undeclared. That is my protection. Rubbish. Because next Janma you will be born with zilch. If you live a selfish life. Okay? So you must think, at least rebirth though is definite because you have desires. Right? So where will you go? You are living in a fancy home. What if you die and you are born on the pavement in the opposite side of the road? Is that not possible? Why would you want a life like that? Instead, develop assets that you can carry forward. And what are these assets that you can carry forward? Spiritual asset. You know, there was a state in which they had this strange custom that a king would be appointed every 5 years. That is not so bad. But after the 5-year term was over, the king would be put into a boat and ferried to the other side of the other shore, where he would be left to be consumed by wild animals. Okay? Now that was the fate of every king. So then he was appointed, he was happy, celebrating. Second year, little bit the thought of what is going to happen to me entered. Third year, blood pressure rose. Fourth year, he was positively. This is what happens to us. See, when you're 20, 30, you're enjoying your life. And by the time you're 50, 60, 70, you get tormented. Why is it that old people can't sleep? Because this thought comes. What will happen to me afterwards? That 5th year, the guy was a mess. So, every king had to be picked up and taken literally put into the boat and carried. In this scenario, once a young man offered to be king. And the difference was, with every passing year, his revelry and his enjoyment increased, not decreased. And on the last day of his term there, he threw a magnificent party for all his citizens, waved goodbye to them, and stepped into the boat. So that boatman was an old man, 80-year-old guy, who had carried many kings across. So he was thinking, what is this? This guy is strange. Just as he was thinking, the king asked him, how much do you earn for carrying a king once in 5 years across? He said, 5,000 rupees a month. The king said, will you work for me if I double your salary? Now the boatman got scared. He thought he was offering him a job in heaven. Just then they reached the other shore and they found, to the boatman's amazement, there was no wild jungle there. There was a magnificent new city that had been constructed where this guy would be permanent king. You understand what it means? During the 5 years where he was temporary king, he was systematically transferring his assets to the other shore, bit by bit. And now he was permanent king. That's what you must do. Of course, enjoy your life here. Who's saying no? Enjoy your life, do the best that you can. But don't forget to transfer your assets. Remember, you're temporary here. At least the king had 5 years guaranteed. We don't even have 5 minutes. I don't mean to frighten you. But that's a fact, isn't it? And what are you doing about it? Sweet nothing. You're like the other kings. You'll be devoured. That's what he's saying here. When you understand this is temporary, ashashvatam, and dukkhalaya, you're just moving from one sorrow to the other, and in between the two sorrows, you grab a little bit of happiness. This is your life. If you look at it philosophically. And for that, you're giving up the kingdom of heaven. How foolish can you get? That's why the scriptures continuously call us not mudha. Mudha means fools. Vimudhaha means supreme fools. Even the Upanishads say that. Still we don't get it. So you see, it's just a shift in attitude. You can continue doing whatever it is that you're doing. Enjoy and add to your enjoyment. Earn wealth, add more to it. How do we know that? King Janaka was a king, but he was a man of realization. So he had wealth the likes of which we can't even imagine now. He didn't give it up. He just developed spiritual values and he got there. So that after he died, he still had a kingdom within himself. So it didn't matter. This we must understand. So, where does the desire come from? Because see, what causes rebirth is desire, right? So you must analyze. Where does the desire come from? Are you hungry now? Are you thinking of food? No, I hope not. When do you think of food? No, when your stomach is empty. Right? So it's the emptiness that causes desire. Now, all of us, all the time, from birth to death, from morning to night, we are consumed by this sense of emptiness. That's why the moment you wake up in the morning, I want my coffee, tea, whatever. And from there it goes on and on. So desire comes from emptiness. Okay? Examine that emptiness. That's what they did. And they found it's imaginary. And this is a fact, friends. All your problems are imaginary. There's nothing there. You get to the bottom of any problem, there's nothing. So you can solve it, right? No, there are people who have fought for generations. Grandfathers started the fight, the parents continued the fight, and the children are still fighting. And then at the end of it, they come to a solution. Okay? What is it called? Arbitration. Then they are friends. And then you feel like asking, 2 generations you've been fighting. Now what happened? Nothing. Settlement. Do you not know people like that? So why did you fight from the beginning? What was the problem? Nothing there. That is the thing. That emptiness is not there. It's imaginary. So what you need is not objects of desire. What do you need?
Knowledge.
Knowledge of what? No. Knowledge of fullness. Not knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. Not knowledge of Upanishads. Not knowledge of any scripture. Just knowledge of your fullness. So every time your mind says, I want this, go get it. But somewhere in the back of your mind, tell yourself, I really don't need it because I'm full. And see how triumphant you feel. Because you're no longer a slave to the world, you don't care whether you get it or not. Because I'm abundant. Great to be like that. Abode of pain, dukkhalaya, and transient, ashashvatam. You know, the freshness of infancy, the awkwardness of childhood, the passions of adolescence, the idealism of youth, ambitions of adulthood, and worries of old age. All are temporary. They are meant for transit, not permanent habitation. You know, this is the problem. When Indians go to any part of the world, those people are scared. Because you come on a transit visa and you stay put there, you never go. Isn't it true? Not only you go, but you get your entire tribe there. That's what happened with, this is a real life story. In the United States, there was one Gujarati, the first Gujarati who went there. He worked in a motel and the boss was an American. He went on holiday, the boss went on holiday and left this Gujarati guy to look after the place. And by the time he came back, this was like 18th century, he realized, Gujarati realized it, they have brains, business brains. So he realized, Arey, why should I be his servant, employee? I'll start my own motel. First motel by a Gujarati started. And he was a Patel. So, I'm not joking, this is a true story. And then he said, alone I can't run the motel. So he sent for his relatives. 30, 40 Patels landed up. And that today, they've gone up the chain. They no longer run motels, they run Hilton, hotels all over. This is the story. This is why they don't want to give a visa to Indians. You know, your sons are there, they're never going to come back. Given a chance. Say goodbye to them forever. So we don't understand transit visa. We don't understand temporary habitation. Wherever we go, we get stuck. That's the problem. We'll do one more verse.
आब्रह्मभुवनालोकाः,
'आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः, आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,  आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,   आब्रह्म भुवनालोकाः,
पुनरावर्तिनोऽर्जुन मामुपेत्य तु कौन्तेय पुनर्जन्म न विद्यते.
O Arjuna, the worlds including Brahmaloka are subject to return. But having obtained me, there is no rebirth, O Kaunteya. So, you see, it's like this. There is this concept of hell and heaven in every religion, in every culture, right? What is that? You perform extremely negative actions, which the result cannot be experienced in the world, because in human life you have a certain high positive and a certain low negative. You transcend that, you smash through that negativity, you have to go to hell. It's not a geographic location, it's a mental state, and you come back after death. This is the theory, okay? Ordinary, plus minus, like what we do, you die, you come back on earth only. But there are people who perform desire-driven positive actions, very, very positive. Like they do a great deal of service and too much service, but it's driven by desire. Now the result of that cannot be experienced in the human form. So you go to heaven, where they say the enjoyment is 4.32 billion times. They've actually given a figure. Now don't ask me. I have not gone there and come back. So I don't know. But the theory is like that. So that's what he's saying. Up to Brahmaloka, the worlds including Brahmaloka are subject to return, because whether negative or positive or ordinary, you are driven by desire. So that has a result, and you have to come back. So only a spiritual person who has reached realization, having obtained me, there is no rebirth. So he establishes that. So what kind of action must you perform? Not desire driven. Just step out of that lane into nishkama karma. Means desireless action. What is desireless action? Just follow, do what you have to do. You know, like a member of the family, there are certain obligations you have. Perform those obligations to the best of your ability, happily, not pulling a long face. As an employee, as you're working somewhere, either you're the boss or you're an employee, fulfill your obligations there. To your employees, to your employer, to society, to the nation, to the world. We have obligations. Just fulfill your obligations. Then what happens? You get there. And slowly you find the pull of desire fades away. Because you're focused on your obligation. So you have work to do, and a friend invites you during working hours. You say, I can't come because I'm working. See, in America, you cannot even think of telling a person during a weekday, come have lunch with me. He cannot come because they're at work. But here, you know what the situation is. So that's the thing. Once you're focused on obligation, then you become free from the stranglehold of desire. And you're free to do what you want. Today you're not. You have a desire, you are its victim. Like those of you who have a desire for football, what happens? You stay up at night watching the football match. You have no freedom to live apart from it. Those of you who are committed, who are addicted to doom scrolling, every day you will do that. You can't break away from it. And you don't understand you're a victim of it. What a stupid thing to do, to be a victim of a phone. So think how to break away from the stranglehold of desire. Okay? Thank you.
पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते।